Mr. NK Singh is a veteran Indian policymaker and the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission. He's seen as one of the most foremost voices when it comes to policy formulation in India, and hence, for all the youngsters out there, you must listen to this conversation because it will give you insights that you would have never got before. Mr. Singh, Dr. Singh, thank you so much for your time here on NDTV. Sir, the nature of this conclave and the title is Emerging Businesses. And in the emerging businesses domain, MSMEs, that is the micro, small and medium enterprises, they form 90% of the businesses and employ nearly 3/4 of workers in emerging markets and developing economies. And hence creating jobs and better jobs depend on them. The recent World Bank report, as we were discussing over the weekend, sir, highlights the gap challenges. How do you think we as a nation, and you as a policymaker who gives vision and options to the government of India, can achieve the goals that have been set by the government, and also how can we harness the challenges being highlighted by that report?
Well, thank you very much, Maria. It's always a great pleasure to be at the functions of NDTV. And you have, of course, been one of the great anchors which followed your transit from one vantage point to another. Your question today has 3 dimensions. You have sought to focus on the MSME. Now, you know, it's true that I pointed out to you just 4 days ago that the annual spring meeting of the IMF and the World Bank, which has just concluded day before yesterday, each spring meeting has an annual document. The last year's spring meeting had the document seeking a new roadmap for the World Bank and the IMF. Last year's document was shared poverty, shared prosperity in a livable planet. This year, the document is about jobs, and in the jobs, the World Bank group has assigned an important place to the role of the MSME. Now that in itself signifies the high priority. Not only that the jobs are necessary, because we realize that this is one of the very serious global problems, the issue of how to harness technology productively with creation of value-added jobs. This is a challenge which the society in general is facing all over, harnessing technology and gainful employment. In this context, the World Bank report has suggested a number of steps and the important role that the MSME can play. In India, which you correctly pointed out, 30% of India's GDP comes from the MSME. And out of the MSMEs category, particularly the micro sector constitutes 90% of this category of MSMEs. The problems that I can see, which that report has brought out in encapsulating in a sentence, is one, on the access to credit, assured credit. Right now it looks as though something like 25 lakh crores is still the remaining credit gap. The formalization of the sector itself is far from complete, and only 14% of the MSME sector has been formalized. The last report, which you know was done by a colleague of mine, NK Singh, who did that report to say that a very small percentage forms part of the formal sector. So access, assured access, and bridging the credit gap is one very big overarching issue. The second very big overarching issue is how to enhance its ability to upgrade its productivity and upgrade its skill. And skill and productivity upgradation remains a challenge. Third, of course, is the access to marketing and growing technology changes. And the last, of course, is its important contribution to the GDP of the country as a whole and enhance its contribution to India's export effort. All these are quite symmetric to India's own vision of 2047, and in that vision, the integral role of the MSME remains a very, very important critical component.
Dr. Singh, since we are talking about the World Bank report, you have worked and led multiple financial institutions world over. In terms of best practices around the world, what can we learn from other countries?
It's a nice question, because I could turn the question, Maria, the other way around. That as I looked at the typology of progress and the overall architecture of the progress done by other countries, not only what we can learn, but there's an enormous amount that others can learn from us. We have indeed on every important parameter. Take the big parameter of what is talked about, the great Kenyan example, or the South African example, or the Brazilian example, or the Vietnamese example. What do they relate to? They relate to three important factors. They relate, if you sum it up, one is enhancing access to formal credit. I just mentioned to you that that's work in progress. We have done a great deal. The South African example is about vocational training. We have skill development programs. It can be, of course, significantly improved, enhanced, and be aligned to technology. There are these examples of Vietnam on developing labor-intensive export hubs. We are doing that in some measure. That, of course, needs to be greatly enhanced. I mean, we have begun the obvious ones where the labor-intensive components are critical, namely on textiles, on toys, and leather, and so on. And that's one example. We have the use of our digital stack is something which the world has been taken aback. In fact, we have as much to learn, and we must always recognize that we have a lot to learn, but the world recognizes that they have a lot to learn from our own experience, which has been a very positive one.
Dr. Singh, since you spoke about certain countries, my next question would be around these countries, and what about developed nations? What are they learning from India? Many would say that our digital payment infrastructure is everybody's envy now. They look towards us and they keep wondering, how did India achieve so much, particularly to do with UPI and the digital payment. And it is all a phenomena in the last 10 years. It is of the Modi era.
Well, certainly, I think that the world is quite a bit in awe of our digital stack. They recognize that in terms of the matrix of government, that the way in which, for instance, and this is repeated, Maria, very frequently, India was able to deal with the pandemic is quoted as a global example in terms of the way in which food supplies, vaccines, healthcare, best examples. We made the fullest use of technology. That suggests to the world that India is more than ready to be in a position to be an important shaper of improved governance models, because the use of digital technology is an improvement on the governance variables which we have, and far from government being coming in way, I think that we have had a lot to learn. Now, let me tell you, where I feel we still have to learn a great deal. As two factors, Maria, has
Please.
really troubled me. One is that the complexities of our compliance regulations, far too many compliances, far too many rules, far too many draconian rules. I think this is recognized when the Prime Minister has announced some time ago that he is seriously thinking of a deregulation commission. The Finance Minister recognized this in the light of the economic survey that we need to get out of the way. Get out of the way is, if you look at it, the number of compliances at beginning from the third tier of government to working up to state level to multiplicity of organizations and entities at the state level, and then of course the central government, the various departments of the central government, the burden of compliance is quite high. We need to certainly give that a priority. The fact that the Finance Minister mentioned this, and there is already a group working on how to improve and bring down the total number of compliances, led by the Cabinet Secretary, is a positive thing. But the Prime Minister has gone a step further in mentioning about not a compliance, but a deregulatory commission, suggests that India over the period has become mature enough, and many of these rules have become handicaps. Rules are necessary because the rules are necessary to ensure that appropriate conduct and compliance with the broad framework has been done. But when the rules do not serve the purpose, but serves a purpose which is entirely different, has become a handicap to creativity, to growth, to productivity, to employment, and indeed to the growth strategy. I end by saying that, these rules are hurting India's investment climate in general. Take, for instance, two areas on the rules. I've often felt that the entire legal rubric and the entire legal framework has remained substantially unreformed. The world recognizes that India has one of the most transparent legal systems, but they often joke with me that that's true, Mr. Singh, but when do we see the end of the interlocutory processes? Hopefully, they believe, in the lifetime of this project. So I think that India's legal complexities is one area which requires a fundamental change and a restructuring of the entire legal architecture to serve the broader objective of societal necessity in terms of conformity to law and order, to security, to the basic principles of the rule of law. That's not questioned. What is questioned is the cumbersome systems which have got accumulated, which have debted against speedy dispersal of a just and free system about which we are rightly proud of and which the world upholds.
And now I'm coming to a question which is very close to my heart, and this is with regards to women-led enterprises, women-led governance. There's the statistics which has, of course, been shared by the World Bank report that women-led enterprises represent 23% of all MSMEs, but they account for 32% of the financing gap. When informal enterprises are included, the finance gap actually rises to almost $8 trillion. And this is linked to women enterprises, women-led development. Besides, we have often seen women as the beneficiary of the government schemes and policies, and particularly coming from the state where both of us come from, in Bihar, women have always been seen as a captive vote bank because of them being beneficiaries of the state. How do you mainstream gender in MSMEs?
Well, I think that it's a very important question. Certainly the World Bank report which you point out has highlighted that the financing gap is disproportionately higher in the case of women-led enterprises than in respect of the other categories. And I think that requires to be redressed in very special ways. First and foremost, of course, we know that there is budgeting, gender budgeting for government initiative needs to be intensified, needs to be closely monitored. The credit availability given to women entrepreneurs, and we did talk about the fact that out of the great number of MSMEs which exist, 90% of them are micro ones. A very small percentage of it is really in the small and then in the medium ones. So I think we especially need to refocus programs for closing the gender gap in terms of the availability of funding, and to at least let us take upon ourselves the target that in the next 12 months or so, in the next update that the World Bank does to this report on employment, the issues of the gap, financing gap for the women-led entrepreneurs would have been substantially closed and come in at footing with the normal amount of finances available for the rest of the sector. The second is that they require special help in technology, skill upgradation, and becoming part of the value-added chain, marketing issues, and becoming part of the value-added chain in this country. I'm not even talking about global value-added chain, but becoming integral to the value-added chain for India's supplies factors would be a very, very important thing. So I think we need to harness this great untapped potential. Just as we look at Viksit Bharat, we expect that instead of 30% coming from the MSME, it should be 40%. That as far as exports are concerned, a very substantial increase of export capability from the MSME sector. We look equally to the women entrepreneurs playing a more important role in this entire process as the MSME sector become integral to India's quest for a Viksit Bharat.
Since we are talking about Viksit Bharat, let's look at India's quest for becoming the third largest economy and a developed country. What role do you think MSMEs can play in a broader context?
So for India to get to by 2047, we need to sustain at least about 8% GDP growth in real terms, which hoping inflation to be around the inflation band, 11 to 12% sustained growth for the next several decades to bridge the income gap. We need, first of all, policies which will enable this growth rate to be sustained, reforms to be sustained, which means continued reforms of the factors of production, land, labor, capital, significant improvement in the infrastructure, a significant improvement in India's export capability to sustain really the current account deficits to be more or less in the same region, to have the continued symmetry on the macro policies between monetary and fiscal policies. These are, of course, to be taken for granted. Now, your question was, what can the MSME sector, the important role they can play? I did mention that if today they constitute 30%, I think that the targets which have been laid down by experts and expert committee reports is to take this 30% to 40% coming from the MSME sector for India to become a developed economy for 2047. Equally, in terms of the women empowerment, since that was a subject we talked of earlier, taking it significantly upwards from the current about 30% or so to about 45, 50% coming from women entrepreneurs, since we are talking in terms of micro and medium enterprises where it's very easily possible. Considering the skills in the labor-intensive sector, some of which are also export sector, which I have mentioned, women can have an increasingly important role to play. So the role of MSME sector in India becoming a developed economy is not only a supporting productivity role in terms of improving the capital output ratio, total factor productivity, but becoming really a higher proportion of the GDP coming from this sector, with an increasingly higher proportion of women making an important role to play. Women and the full empowerment of women is one of our secret weapon, apart from the harnessing of what technological capabilities in terms of leapfrogging technology and blending it with the availability of higher value-added employment. And technology and women empowerment would be two of our very important instruments for enabling us to reach what is our legitimate quest of making India a developed economy by 2047.
So put women particularly up right there at the center of the development story of India. Thank you so much. And of course, along with technology. Dr. Singh, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for this fascinating conversation.